Welcome everybody. In this video we are going to cover functions and functions in Python. Oh man, for all the times you've suffered in C and C++, functions in Python are either going to make you really love the language or really hate that it took you so long to come across a language that can do this with functions. So functions are similar to for loops, while loops, conditional statements, if, else, and the fact that the body of the code starts with the statement. So why don't we start with creating a function and creating its inputs and returning an output. So for this program, I'm going to have to use the square root function. So I'll be importing it. So from math, and math.py is a standard Python file considered part of the Python library. And I'm going to import a function called square root because I don't want to write my own. Okay, so in order for me to create a function in Python, all I have to do is use the keyword def. So def defines a function, and I'm going to call it mean, and its input is going to be an array. Really a list, but an array. And notice how I don't have to define any output data type nor input data type. I just define a function, give it a name, and I give it its inputs. In this case, we only have one input, and it's called array. The body of the function begins with the colon, so now I'm going to start it. And as simple as this, I'm just going to return, and I'm going to call another function called sum, and what sum does is we'll return the sum of a start value plus an iterable amount of numbers. And in this case, since my input's array, I'll be using array. But calculating a mean is just not summing the entire array. I need to delete the I need to divide by the length of the array. And that's what's done here. So it would take, I don't know, 7 to 8 lines of code for C and C++. We can do in one line in Python. It's as simple as that. However, when we calculate our next function, which I'll call standard dev, things can get a little bit complicated even if it is in Python. So I'm going to define another function. I'm going to call it standard dev for standard deviation. It'll have the same array. One thing that I'll do is I'll say array mean, I'll create a variable, is equal to the mean of the array. So what this is going to do is actually call this mean function, which is pretty nice. Python will look is similar to C and C++, in which when you have some sort of function or library function call, it will look upwards to find any definition of it, and it's still the same in Python. So I'll be creating an array mean of the array, and I'll create some array sum, which is going to be equal to 0, and I'm going to create a for loop. So for the elements in the array, I'm going to say array sum plus equals elements minus the array mean, to follow the definition of standard deviation, because we need to subtract each element of our array with the mean, and we have to square that result. Finally, what we'll do is that we'll create my sigma variable, and I'll say it's array sum divided by the length of our array. After that, all we have to, so here I calculated the variance, right? If I want to calculate the standard deviation, I need to take the square root. So I will return the square root of sigma, right, where sigma is a singular value. So this is a function that gets a list as its input and returns one singular value. Standard deviation is the same thing. We'll take a list and we'll calculate its mean, we'll calculate the variance, and we'll take the square root and return the standard deviation, where this is one singular value. So why don't we test this? I will say first, is equal to a simple array that we can know the mean and standard deviation of. Right, so the mean should be 1.5 and the standard deviation should be 0.5. So we'll print the array, and then we'll print the mean, which will be the mean of first, and then we will do standard deviation. Right, and then we'll compute the standard deviation of first. So why don't we run this code? So first we call our first function mean, and then we have the implementation here. Then we call standard dev, which will compute the standard deviation here. Right? It'll print it in our print function. So why don't we run this result? Okay, so we print our array, we calculate the mean, which is 1.5. This is correct if we do the mathematics, and the standard deviation is 0.5, which also makes sense if we compute the mathematics. So why don't we try with a more arbitrary array? So I'll create a second list called second, and I'll put some values. 7, 20, 13, 75, 94, and let's say 51. Okay, so we'll do this, except for second. And we'll see what the result is. So this is the mean, and this is the standard deviation. I will leave it up to you to see if this is correct, but I'm highly confident that it is. And this is an introduction to functions. So with this type of function, something to notice is that they are quite similar. They take a list as an input, and they return a singular value as its output. In the next video, we'll be covering an example that has 3 argument inputs and has a possibility of returning a list, but also a singular value, which is quite baffling compared to C and C++. You would not think of returning something like that. Thank you.